After Manifest debuted back in 2018, we all knew it had something special, but then NBC canceled the show for budgetary reasons. Luckily for fans, though, Netflix is back to save the day, renewing the franchise for a 4th season. So while we wait, let's take a look back at some of the most wholesome moments the series has to offer. Number 1, Zeke's bachelor party. When it comes to relationships portrayed on the silver screen, romance is always preferred over and above friendship. Being placed in the friend zone is considered to be a negative outcome after all, but having a great romantic aspect shine through in a show has become almost commonplace over the last few decades. It's something that the fan base expects and tends to be brought into a franchise in an attempt to appease the masses. But Manifest decided to go a different route. We're not saying that there was no romance in the show, as that would be a ridiculous statement to make. But what we are saying is that the writers and showrunners of the franchise ensured that it had something that no other franchise does. We are referring to the incredible friendship between Zeke Landon, as portrayed by Matt Long, and Cal Stone, who was brought to life by the young Jack Messina. It wasn't just the audience that was so surprised with this relationship, but the cast members as well. According to reports, Matt and Jack still spend their odd off days with one another, showing just how close they became on set. While there are a great many heartwarming moments to choose from when it comes to their made-for-television friendship, there's one in particular that we had to bring up here today. This was a moment back in season 2 where Zeke asked Cal to be his best man, which resulted in the young man showing off one of the biggest smiles in the history of the show. As you're well aware though, best man is not just an honorary title. It's the best man who ensures that wedding preparations are going smoothly, and more importantly, that the bachelor party is a night to remember for the groom. Since Cal is so young, it's not exactly surprising that instead of planning a rager, he went on to supply Zeke with a night of junk food and Monopoly, which was obviously different to what Zeke was expecting at the end of the day. Watching the two have an amazing time together at one of the most wholesome bachelor parties we have ever seen before was a moment that, for some reason, sticks in our minds. It also showed that Zeke and Cal have something special. Until then, many believed that Zeke was only pretending to care about Cal since the young man had saved him all those years ago. But the joy on Zeke's face during his wholesome bachelor party was something that nipped this theory in the bud pretty quickly. Sure, it may be a strange friendship, considering the age of the participants, but moments like this really make us wish that we see something similar in the upcoming 4th installment. With all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world at the moment, we feel like we need it. Number 2, Jared's supportive reaction. Another heartwarming moment that makes our list concerns the relationship between Michaela Stone and Jared Vasquez, as portrayed by the incredible talents of Melissa Roxburgh and J.R. Ramirez, respectively. To give some context to the moment, it's at this time back in season 1 that something called callings are experienced, which are later explained to be the effects of the dark lightning that the passengers of Flight 828 experienced on that fateful day. For those of you who have already forgotten, a victim of the event who has been called starts to experience a number of things, while the majority of the passengers find themselves experiencing a voice inside their head with the intention of driving them towards a certain purpose. Some even experience hallucinations. Suffice to say, many keep quiet out of fear that they will be deemed crazy after being diagnosed with a mental disorder like PTSD, for example. So when Michaela and Ben discover that both of them are experiencing the same thing, they decide to reveal this to their significant others. For Michaela, this was one of the best decisions she had ever made, as her partner Jared took the opportunity to tell her that everything was going to be okay. He supported her through it all and even tried his best to understand what she was feeling at that moment. Even though the most logical explanation is that his wife was experiencing some or other mental break, Jared believed her, showing just how well suited they are for one another. But what really made this moment between the lovebirds so wholesome is the fact that Ben's confession to his wife Grace resulted in the polar opposite reaction. When Ben ends up telling her about the callings that he's experiencing, Grace shows that she doesn't have a sympathetic or understanding bone in her body, telling Ben that he is clearly crazy and needs to get some help from a therapist in the coming days. We also have to remember that the conversation between the married couple took place just after he told Grace that he really needed to talk to someone, showing just how vulnerable he had made himself, only to be stabbed in the back by the woman he loves most. We know it must have been difficult for Grace to comprehend at the time, but we really believe that Ben deserved a lot more. As we mentioned earlier, the moment went on to add to the wholesomeness of Jared's reaction, making us smile, knowing that at least someone out there has the ability to be supportive. 3. The pilot episode. You might not have noticed the next heartwarming moment on our list immediately upon viewing the show, as it actually takes place a few minutes into its first episode ever. We are referring to that moment where the passengers of Flight 828 finally land in New York, only to realize that a couple of years have passed with them not having aged a day in the process. It's a realization that shows how there is a broader mystery on the horizon, and while it left the majority of us confused, rewatching this pilot episode makes us appreciate the little things. After knowing who our favorite characters are, like Zeke and Michaela, for example, it's so heartwarming to see them reuniting with their families once again. Rewatching this moment and understanding what the premise of the franchise is allows the feeling of confusion to be replaced by one of wholesomeness. Imagine your loved ones disappearing for a couple of years, leading to a great many of the passengers being presumed dead. And then one day, out of the blue, these family members appear once more, no different than the last time you set your eyes on them. Sure, it's a spooky moment, but right there and then, we can imagine just how incredible it must have been to see them again. But as we mentioned earlier, this is a moment that doesn't quite carry enough emotion when you're watching the show for the first time. You need to know a bit more about the characters and have an idea about the broader mystery of the show before you can truly concentrate on the emotions being portrayed by the family members of the passengers of Flight 828. There's a reason why the pilot episode of the franchise was voted as the second best episode in the runtime of the series. With emotions like that on display, it's really no surprise at all. Number 4, Jared finally admits how he feels. Season 1 of the franchise also introduced us to the rocky relationship that Michaela and Jared used to have with one another. It quickly becomes clear that the main reason behind their fighting words is miscommunication, with Jared not being the best at telling Michaela exactly how he is feeling. A great example of this is back when Jared refused to come down to the hangar, leaving Michaela to fend for herself in this new world that she didn't yet understand. She was absolutely heartbroken that Jared hadn't shown up, even though the two weren't exactly together. So when Jared shows up at her door in episode 10, fans held their collective breaths and got ready for a massive fight. This seems inevitable after all, with her first reaction to him barging into her apartment being one of "get out" and "you can't be here." But then Jared did something that nobody expected him to. With a massive amount of emotion in his eyes, he admitted to Michaela how he actually feels about her. He explained that he never went to the hangar because he knew that if he ever saw her, he wouldn't go home. This is then followed by the immortal words of "Mick, you're not a wrecking ball, you're my soulmate," which obviously throws the beautiful leading lady into a bit of a flat spin. After denying what Jared is actually feeling, only to have him repeat it once more, Michaela stands there open-mouthed, not sure what to do in the moment. And then, after inching closer to her with a big smile on his face, Jared admits that he loves her with all his heart, saying with certainty that it's always been her. The incredible moment then concludes with Michaela going in for the kiss, which then evolves into something a little less PG. The anger and frustration that had been building between the two had a pretty common fix, and the lovebirds found that out the morning after. We know that quite a few terrible moments resulted from this one, but there's no doubt that Jared admitting his feelings has been our favorite wholesome moment to date. What do you think? Did we miss out on your favorite heartwarmer?